Hey, what's up, friends? Alex Kapitko here, and we are back here on the Centered from Reality podcast. I hope your Wednesday is treating you well. It is quite early Wednesday morning that I'm recording this, trying to stay ahead of all the news and just events happening as always. It's just me, your friendly ex-Republican, former Democrat, who is just trying to wade my way through the world, I guess you could say. Anyways, it's just cold and windy here in Chicago. Nothing really new. I keep hearing people say we're out of winter. Springtime is here. We're gonna get into the warm season. Blah blah blah. I not gonna lie, I haven't seen it yet, so I'm starting to wonder if that's ever gonna happen. But no, I'm sure it will. It'll be nice for probably like a month or two, and then we get the brutal summer heat, which I'm also not too excited about. Just off the bat, I just wanted to say I was wrong about something. Nothing to do with politics, but I just have to share it because why not? I talk to this microphone, so yeah, just bear with me. But I've become kind of a contrarian who doesn't like the Marvel movies. Every time I watch a Marvel movie, I end up liking them. But I think I just am like a contrarian by just default. So every time everyone's talking about something, I just feel like I have to not like it. And I guess I don't like the Marvel hype. But okay, so I don't know. I was really tired after my couple flights back to Chicago. I'd watched maybe 10 minutes of the new Spider-Man movie on my flight, but I was like, I want to watch this on the couch. So I ended up deciding to watch the whole new Spider-Man series. So Homecoming, Far From Home, and then tonight I'm going to watch No Way Home. And I got to say, the first two are amazing. I really liked them. I like the story. I like the acting. Zendaya is always great. Tom Holland, I think, does a great job at Spider-Man. I don't know why I'm really telling you guys this, but I was just really wrong, and it's taught me to maybe be a little more open, and maybe I should use that in more aspects of my life. Maybe that's why I'm talking about it here, is you can't judge a book by its cover. You can't just be a contrarian by nature, stuff like that, I guess. So, yeah, I was just really impressed. So, I guess I'm going to give some of the other ones I never watched another chance, basically, if that works. So, yeah, we'll we'll move on though. Anyways, I wanted to first discuss just some interesting revelations in the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Yesterday, which was Tuesday, I read throughout the news and media that there's going to be a big Russian troop reduction around Kyiv. Now, I'll go into maybe the other side of that in a few minutes because I don't know if I actually buy that story, but apparently, spokespeople from Moscow said that the forces would, in quotes, drastically reduce military activity on two fronts in Kyiv and Chernihiv. And this was according to the Russian Defense Ministry, and also following in-person talks between Russia and Ukraine in Istanbul. And two senior U.S. officials called the development a huge and major shift in strategy, which it would be, definitely. And from what I've gathered, Russia is basically saying this is trying to show a sign of good faith so that they can try and establish some form of trust between the two countries, Ukraine and Russia, so that they can at least start conversations, start negotiations. Going further into that, I also saw that a Russian politician and member of the Defense Ministry, Vladimir Medinsky, said on RT, which is obviously state Russian TV, said that the first step agreed by Russia in talks with Ukraine concerns a gradual military de-escalation in those two main regions I talked about, Kyiv and Chernihiv. And he also added here in quotes, "We understand that there are people in Kyiv who need to make decisions, so we do not want to expose this city to additional risk. First, I will just say that I guess if this is true, it's a great sign. Russia's probably understanding that clearly things are not working out, which they are not. It'd be a good sign, right? Conversation is always good. That's one of the main parts of this podcast, talking. I really hope a conversation can be had. And while that's promising, maybe I'm being a Debbie Downer here, but it was Anne Applebaum, who I've talked about before, who is one of my favorite authors, Polish-born expert on the region, many best-selling books on Ukraine, the Iron Curtain, the Red Famine. And she said that she thinks Russia is just retreating because they're losing and is not acting in good faith. And I would probably more agree on that, right? I'd probably be on more of that side than this optimistic one at the moment. Just because, let's be honest, right? Russia's been struggling in taking other cities. They've lost massive amounts of forces. I've heard reports that the tires tanks were missing key parts of the tires. Some tires were deflated. They didn't have enough clothes or equipment or food, which shows there was probably a corruption in the upper ranks of the military. They also weren't prepared because they thought it would be quick, so they didn't really pack a backup of supplies. Morale is declining, while morale on the Ukrainian side seems to be doing quite well. So just generally, Russia's not doing well. And so it would make much more sense to me that they are just being humiliated and they're just pushing back now. And they're just saying it's out of good faith. They've had success in the east, mainly the Donbas region. I don't know if I'd really call Mariupol success. I mean, they've just pretty much indiscriminately bombed the city. I don't really know if that's a success. They've been deporting Ukrainians back to Russia. I don't really know if that's actually a success. You're just kind of subjugating a people to control. But outside of the east, where there obviously are pro-Russian separatists, there are republics that do not want to be part of Ukraine. Outside of those regions, the Russian troops have just been humiliated, right? And it would just make much more sense that they're just lying about acting in good faith. And they're actually just retreating, right? Not a lot of good faith on the Russian side has happened so far in this conflict, so retreating just makes so much more sense to me. And if you remember last week, I mentioned that there are reports that Russian forces basically declared the first stage of the conflict over, which is still puzzling because they didn't really get too much further into what that actually means. And they said, they'd lost troops, they'd been stalled, the first stage had been completed, and they were moving on to the next stage after struggling to take any of these cities more in the center and the west. And if you take that statement last week in with this current statement of them now basically saying they're going to start de-escalating their forces around Kyiv, it's probably just because they're losing and changing things more than just being good faith actors. Also, I would add that there's been kind of a fascinating shift in Russia's rhetoric around the goal of their invasion, which, it was the denazification of Ukraine, that we're going to come in as liberators, the people aren't going to fight. Just side note, that's never really happened, right? I mean, if you look at Vietnam even, Iraq, unfortunately, Chechnya, Syria, I mean, every time a country goes in and says we're going to liberate these people and they're going to welcome us, it doesn't ever really seem to happen that way. But anyways, I've been reading about a pretty fascinating shift in Russia's rhetoric about the goal of their invasion. I'm getting this from the Times of Israel because it was the most recent one, but I've also seen other publications such as Newsweek have covered this. But apparently Russia's defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, he now said, in quotes, that they are liberating just the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine, and that has been the main goal of their military operation the whole time. Liberating the Donbas region is their only goal, apparently. I don't know about you guys, but it wasn't that long ago that they were using this rhetoric of denazification, stopping Ukraine from joining NATO, and Ukraine doesn't exist as a country. I guess if you live inside of Russia and you've bought all this propaganda, then I guess it doesn't surprise you. But for all of us who have been just following what's happening, I find it really hard to believe that they're just liberating the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine. And people do really think this is underlining a possible shift in their strategy, again, probably because they're doing so poorly. Sergei Shoigu said also that, in quotes, the combat potential of the Ukrainian armed forces has been significantly reduced, which makes it possible to focus the main attention and main efforts on achieving the main goal, the liberation of Donbas. I mean, this is interesting. So if they've weakened the Ukrainian forces significantly, and now they're pulling back from Kyiv, but now they also have all the power to take the Donbas region, none of this is adding up to me. I'm just saying, if you have half a brain, this doesn't really add up, but let's just say it's true. So now, guys, if this is true, this is a fascinating shift, right? Because, like I've said ad nauseum here, Russia has gone from liberating and denazification to now just accomplishing their goal of taking the Donbas region. That's a huge de-escalation of the conflict. And I think this also feeds into my hypothesis that Russia knows they're not doing well, and now are just moving the goalpost to something more attainable. Whether the international community will find that attainable is definitely beyond me, but it is somewhat fascinating. And if these reports are true, which I think there is no reason they're not, I guess. I wonder if Russia's original goal was just to take this region, but they wanted to kind of confuse and fire hose the system to confuse NATO allies by rhetoric about taking all of Ukraine. I have no evidence to back this up at this time, but, I've done episodes on how Russia uses the fire hose of falsehood to basically flood the system with misinformation to confuse people. Also, all this rhetoric about taking Ukraine, also all these bombings. What if that was the goal, was just to kind of distract everyone so they could do this? I just wonder if it was a diversion, But as I say that out loud, it would have been a really stupid and costly and deadly diversion, so maybe I'm just dead wrong, but it is just kind of strange. The whole thing is strange, and I am not going to even try to admit to understand it very well, but all this confusion, there must be something to it, right? I mean, I know as humans we like to always think that there's a bigger picture, there's a bigger plan, but I guess maybe it's just ineptitude. It's also, though, looking like we may see the partitioning of Ukraine coming up. I don't support that. I don't think that's a good idea, but that does look like kind of where we're headed. So NPR a few hours ago, actually on Tuesday night, also reported that Russia seems focused on the east. It says in quotes here, there's a region where Moscow-backed separatists seized land years ago. And so that's the Donbas, Donetsk, Crimea region, and that they're going to probably try to get that partitioned off. Forbes also has an interesting article that discusses how Ukraine's top military intelligence official, Kirill Budanov, said on Sunday that Russia appears to be focusing on retaining control of occupied areas of southern and eastern Ukraine and splitting the country in two, rather than taking the entire country. He thinks that this is actually really interesting, he thinks that a scenario more like North and South Korea could be coming. And Andrew Weiss, the vice president for the studies at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, also said that there's basically going to be an attempt to create a North-South Korea formal division of the country. And I think that's actually really fascinating because I think it was a couple weeks ago I was talking just with some friends, and that actually did flash through my head. It's like, and I think it was, I forget the podcast I was listening to. I think it might have been Bill Kristol, who obviously is flawed in his own ways, but he was talking about that, how some of the parallels here seem almost like that beginning of the Cold War era, like during the Korean War, and how we saw this giant kind of schism happen in Korea. And it does kind of seem like, in a sense, you do have a country that does have some pro-separatists on one side, but the majority of the country is like, hell no, we don't want to be involved in that. I have also read, going off of that Zelensky has voiced at least some willingness to give some of the east to Russia, or at least let them have an independent republic that is independent from both Ukraine and Russia. And what I don't know here is if Putin still wants Zelensky to leave office, which I think is a no-starter, for the country to disarm, which is also a non-starter, and for them to not join NATO, which I think Zelensky would be willing to not join NATO. He's even voiced that. But disarming his country after it was invaded by the country that now wants them to disarm is just stupid, asinine, and absurd. I've also heard, and I think this would be kind of smart, I don't know exactly how this would happen, but I've also heard speculation that maybe Ukraine may not join NATO, but potentially they could join a different agreement with other European nations like France and Germany and the Scandinavian countries. And it could be kind of a shared mutual agreement of defense that's not NATO, but it's more Eurocentric, I guess you could say. And they could also maybe even join the EU, because basically Putin's terms right now are against NATO. NATO seems to really keep Putin up at night. And maybe there's other ways they could get Ukraine into the European theater and the European-centered zone without, violating the terms of a potential no-starter with NATO. Either way, I think we can still... I just think we still do not know what Putin wants, how paranoid he is, and whether he thinks he can find an off-ramp here. Obviously, like I talked about it last week, and the media just won't shut up about it. I mean, Biden's statements about Putin and how this guy needs to go and the country will never be good until he's gone, I don't think they were that bad. I know what Biden was doing. He was just voicing his frustration about what's happened. Like, a lot of us are thinking the same thing. People laughed off when Lindsey Graham said that. And Lindsey Graham says a lot of bullshit, but I don't think that was one that needed to be laughed off. But, I mean, I do feel like those comments have fed right into Putin's propaganda and his paranoia that the West just wants to overthrow the Russian government. Granted, we have done it in the past, so I mean, it's always on the table. And I just do wonder how Putin sees an off-ramp here. And also on another note, I know we need to end things and stop the killing, but I still just don't think we really want to appease Putin here and let him take some of the land, because honestly, a compromise is going to need to be reached. I know that, and maybe it's just me ranting here, but like, if Putin gets part of Ukraine and he gets Ukraine to not join NATO and whatever else he may be asking, if he gets those things, it's basically showing him that he can get what he wants. Aren't we kind of in this mess in the first place because we never stood up to him? So he kind of got this liberation to be able to do shit like this. Maybe that's just my opinion, but I just really don't think that we can let him find his way back into the international order. Accountability is really key. I'm a firm believer in the idea basically that without accountability, change or reform cannot happen. Because it's really true. It's like, especially if he keeps doing these attacks, somewhat gets appeased and is able to take, the Donbas region, for example. What does this tell other regions? What does this tell Ethiopia, who's right now waging the war in Tigray? What does this tell China? What does this tell Myanmar? I know I've talked about this before, but it's worth talking about.